Hi stamping friends, welcome back. Today I'm going to play with the Rose Trio stencil from Simon Says Stamps, my watercolors from Arteza, and I'm going to use a nice thick Strathmore 140 pound cardstock watercolor paper for today's project because we are really going to work this paper out with this technique. So I'm starting by adding water to the watercolor paper and choosing a couple of colors. I've decided to go with that medium blue right there and start a wash. So getting it as pliable as I can and starting to add it to my wet card. And I'm going to use the tip of another paintbrush to hold it down. You can tape these down if you want to. You really don't need to because all we're going to do is smash a whole bunch of color on there and then let it dry. And I just don't waste the time doing tape, but feel free to do it if you choose. This is a 5x7 piece of cardstock and I'm going to be cutting it down for our cards when I finished. But the end card result is a 5x7 card. So I'm just adding a little bit more water and I've decided to add a little bit more blue just to mix it in a bit. As you may know, the watercolors, they fade out a little bit as they dry. So it's nice to get them good and bright before it gets to that point. For my second one, I'm going to use the blue again, but this time I'm going to incorporate a little bit of that pretty yellow that you see mooshed at the top in my tray there. And that's what kind of gave me the inspiration for this one. So again with the blue, adding it into my wash, and then I'm going to clean my paintbrush and switch over to that darker yellow color. It's almost an orange, it's a very orangey yellow, and just adding a few splotches. You have to be careful with this one that you don't mix it too much because you know blue and yellow makes green and I don't really want green. So while I am making it wash, I am trying to keep it a little bit on the separate side too. I don't want that funny green color. And you find at the end of this card, I end up liking this background the best because it's got a nice contrast and it really makes the second layer of the stenciling, it really makes it pop. So if you get any big puddles, just wipe them up with your paper towel. And again, I've got a piece of paper towel over on the left-hand side where I'm popping them over to dry. For my third card, I'm doing exactly the same thing, but I'm going to go with a darker blue this time, more of a tealy blue. So adding some water, getting my watercolor paper nice and damp, and then I'm going to come in, and fourth from the left-hand side is this pretty teal blue. Adding this. And I'm going to incorporate it with the green. As you know, I quite like green and blue together. Should be no surprise that I picked those two colors from my background. Now remember, we're going to be doing 2 layers of stenciling over top of this, so just throw the paint on there and have some fun with it because really it's a background. You're not going to see very much of it when we're finished. So again, pick up any little puddles that you have going on. I've got a few of them on this one. And we're going to set these aside to dry so that we can cut them down and start the next stage. So I'm just kind of blending my edges in there a little bit. They were getting a little hard. So grab your cutter of choice. Mine is my Fiskars. I like this little cutter. And I'm cutting this down to 4 1/4 by 6 1/4 so that it's going to fit nicely on my 5x7 card, as I also want to put a little bit of decorative paper behind it as well for an added pop. And I'm kind of trimming each end because I want a little bit of that white space to show. This time you want to tape this little puppy down. So I'm using a hardcore back and I'm using purple tape, but you can also use Post-it note tape. I'm going to be using my Pixie spray for the back of my stencil. This is very important for this particular one because the stencil has a lot of really thin lines in it and detail, and this will hold all those little pieces down on your paper for you. So for this first stage, I'm going to be using Distress Oxides and the Life-Changing brushes, and I'm going to use the stencil in the kind of normal way that you would use a stencil. And I'm just going to add some colors, and for all 3 cards, I'm using Maude Lawn, Mustard Seed, and Mermaid Lagoon. And basically just going around the outside of each of the flowers, the roses, and then adding a separate color into the center, and then of course the green leaves. And this stencil is quite big, so you could also use this for scrapbooking. This would be beautiful in the corners of a nice 12 by 12 scrapbook page. And then you could do a whole pile of overlays with it too. You could actually use this whole entire technique on a scrapbook page. So I'm getting that blue in there. You have to be fairly thick with it. I'm going direct to paper because it's going over top of the watercolor wash, so it might be going over top of green. So adding the yellow, of course, makes a little bit of green because there's that yellow and blue again. Adding a little bit more blue, touching a few spots up. And I'm not minding that the colors are running into each other. I'm not too worried about that. This is a very kind of artistic, loose impression, so I don't mind any colors blending. So don't worry if you get some green onto your blue flower. I'm going to take this and I'm going to wash it to get rid of the distressed oxides. I'm coming back with a clean, dry stencil. And again, I am going to spray it with my Pixie spray. For sure this time because we're going to be playing with the glaze. So I'm going to move this over to the left a little bit, maybe an inch or so. And you don't want to line it up directly. And then I'm going to protective cover the rest of my surfaces with my Post-it note tape, just to make sure that I don't get any glaze where I don't want it. I want the glaze all to be on the left-hand side. So these paper glazes are absolutely awesome. They're from Picket Fence. It's a new item for them. They come in a huge jar, and I believe there are like 11 or 12 colors. The one color I'm missing is white. Everybody wants white because I haven't been able to order it. It's been on back order forever. And I'm just comparing the size with one of the Brutus Monroe ones, just so you get an idea of how big they are. So I have a couple of blues here. I've decided on this more tealy one. And I think this is called Succulent Green. And I'm going to use my palette knife and just add this right over top of the stencil. And the nice thing about this is they're opaque. So you can't, once you get this down, you can't really see what's underneath. Some of the other ones are quite translucent, and I have an example of that near the end of this video for you. And so these blend beautifully. It's just kind of like icing a cake with nice light icing. And get it on there, put any excess back into the jar, put the lid on nice and tight so it doesn't dry out, and then take off your protective covers. And a tip here, go and wash this right now before you do anything else, because you got half an hour before that's going to dry and you can play with it anyway. But make sure that you clean the stencil and your palette knife. So here's a couple that I've done, and see how that yellow pops? Isn't that pretty? I really like that one. So I did the flower in the yellow that time, in the mustard seed, and then put the blue into the center. Now here's the one I was talking about, the translucent. That one is done with the Brutus Monroe, and that's the glitter glaze. And then I did a really thin coat of Dreamweaver embossing paste in white over top of it, just so that it wasn't quite so opaque. And that's very pretty, but it kind of wasn't what I was going for. I really like using the glaze. So here's the first one. That's very transparent, and you can see the colors of the rose in behind it, and it's kind of pretty, and it's got a nice little bit of glitter to it. And you can also change out all these cards for Mother's Day too, just by simply changing out the sentiments. The sentiment I used is the Scriptolo from Simon Says Stamp is the die, and then the sentiment strips are the CZ Designs, and this is Miss You and Hey Bestie. So there's a couple of ideas, and then I also took some of the Altenew black and white paper to put down the left-hand side of each one. Aren't they pretty? I just love this glaze. It's shiny, so it looks like it's wet, and it's opaque, so you get the layers and the textures. And I added some pretty sequins. These are the Flowering Clover sequins, new from Simon Says Stamps. And I shared links to all of that over on my blog. Everything that I used is listed on my blog. It's also listed underneath this video. So I hope you enjoyed today's technique, and I hope you'll give it a try. If you enjoyed my video, please give me a thumbs up. And until next time, toodles!